Speaking of France, we may think of the Louvre, Notre Dame, or the Eiffel Tower, world-renowned luxury goods, Airbus jumbo jets and wine, or famous historical figures, Napoleon, Charles de Gaulle's Palace of Thought, and the many achievements made by France on this land of about 550,000 square kilometers have attracted worldwide attention. From Gaul to France, this Western European country has gone through more than 2 decades of ups and downs in its long history. France is located in Western Europe and is a developed European country and one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations. The full name of France is the French Republic. It also has a nickname, Gaolu Xiongji, the capital during the Paris period. The land area is roughly equivalent to the area of Sichuan province in my country. The population is 70 million. The main ethnic group is French. Most of them believe in Catholicism, and the official language is French. The history of France can be traced back to the ancient Gaul period, and then it experienced the rule of several dynasties and many major historical events. From the old times to the Iron Cavalry era, a fairly systematic system was found on the land of France in various periods. This shows that humans had lived on this land in ancient times. In the long process of historical development, influenced by the civilizations of other regions, French society also gradually changed. Foreign ethnic groups gradually spread. The natives of France were conquered by the ancient Greeks and Celts successively and began to enter a civilized society. Around 1000 BC, Celts from the mountains of Central Europe began to migrate to France, and Celtic invasions occurred. After a long period of migration and reproduction, the Celts established a tribal alliance on the land of France. Later, villages and cities were gradually formed on the basis of the tribes. After 500 BC, France has become the main residential area of the Celts. They were once widely distributed on the European continent and successively conquered France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and other regions. In their heyday, the Celts occupied a large area of land, almost comparable to the Roman Empire. However, they ultimately failed to form a unified country. At that time, the Romans, the Gauls, were called Gauls, and the area they lived in was called Gaul. During the Gaul-Roman period, the Gauls and the Romans were in a state of confrontation for a long time. Around the 2nd century BC, the Romans invaded Gaul, conquered southern Gaul, and established the province of Narbonness. In 58 BC and 51 BC, Caesar, then governor of Gaul, launched 8 expeditions to Gaul, known as the Gallic Wars. This war ended with Rome defeating Gaul and incorporating Gaul halfway through. Gaul then became a province of the Roman Empire. Gaul entered the Roman civilization period. The Gallic War replaced the original loose tribal alliance with the centralized system of Rome. The Gauls gradually became Romanized. From the end of the 1st century to the 2nd century AD, under Roman rule, the Gallic economy flourished, slavery was widely popular, and the agriculture, textile industry, and metallurgy industry all developed. Roman-style buildings can be seen everywhere in the city, such as temples, triumphal arches, arenas, and theaters. Roman-style roads even ran through the entire Gaul. During the reign of the Roman Emperor Claudius I, local nobles in Gaul began to enter the Senate and gradually became independent from the Roman ruling class. The confluence promoted the fairy tale of Gaul. However, due to the high-pressure rule of Rome, the people of Gaul had a hard time living under the heavy taxation policy and the oppression of usury. After several uprisings, in the 3rd century AD, the crisis of Roman slavery spread to Gaul, causing the economic decline of Gaul and the decline of cities. During this period, the province of Gaul once broke away from the Roman Empire and became independent. Gaul was also harassed by Germanic tribes for a long time. The large-scale migration of invading Germanic peoples also affected the development of Gaul. In the 5th century AD, the situation in Gaul deteriorated sharply. The Ionian Empire suffered long-term invasions by the Visigoths. The control of the Roman Empire over Gaul gradually declined. In 418 AD, the Visigoths obtained Aquitaine in southwestern Gaul as allies of the empire and established a kingdom in Aquitaine. In 443 AD, the Burgundians established a kingdom in the basins of the Saône River and the Dragon River, and the Baptists occupied today's Brittany. In 451 AD, Attila, the Hun, who was called the Edge of God by Europeans, led a large army to invade Gaul and was defeated by the coalition forces of Rome and the Manchus. Gaul was completely controlled by the Manchu kings. When the Western Roman Empire began to disintegrate, the powerful Franks, a tribe among the Germanic people, took the opportunity to expand their territory. At the end of the 50th century AD, Clovis, the chief of the tribal clan, began to expand with all his strength and successively decisively defeated the Huns, the Rurans, the Germanic tribes and other Frankish forces. In 486 AD, the Franks, led by Clovis, defeated Sigrius, the last ruler of the Roman Empire in northern Gaul. This victory expanded the rule of the Franks to the area north of the Loire River. The Franks monopolized northern Gaul. This year is considered the founding day of the Frankish kingdom. The Franks established the Frankish kingdom. Clovis named the kingdom the Merovingian dynasty after his grandfather and made Paris his headquarters. The Merovingian dynasty became the first dynasty of the Frankish kingdom. After that, in order to consolidate his ruling regime and expand his power, Clovis married Clotilde, a princess of the kingdom of Burgundy, and formed an alliance with the kingdom of Burgundy. On the other hand, he decided to convert to Catholicism. Since the 4th century AD, a large number of Germanic people have infiltrated the Roman Empire. The Romans in the country regarded these non-Catholics as Manchus, and Clovis converted to Catholicism, so he was no longer a Manchu king but a Catholic student. In addition, when Clovis expanded in Gaul, which was originally part of Rome, he also realized the great influence of Catholicism in the local area. In order to more smoothly conquer the Visigothic kingdom and the kingdom of Burgundy in southern Gaul and end the alliance with other Germanic kingdoms, Clovis could preach to them in the name of combating heresy and get the support of the Catholic Church. As Clovis's power in Gaul grew, the Catholic Church also needed new political partners to safeguard its own interests in Gaul. Since then, Clovis naturally converted to Roman Catholicism in 496 and made Roman Catholicism the state religion. Since then, more and more Franks have become Catholics. The Franks have also become the first Germanic nation to believe in Catholicism. The Catholic Church has also been able to break through the territory of the Western Roman Empire and spread throughout Western Europe. Clovis' conversion to Catholicism is the kingship the result of mutual exploitation with the Church's theocracy was also the source of frequent conflicts between the Germanic state power and the Church in Western Europe. In 507 AD, the Frankish king Clovis led his army to defeat the Visigothic kingdom in the Midnight Battle and finally drove the Visigoths out of Gaul. At this time, the Burgundian kingdom in the east had also paid tribute to him. Clovis had basically conquered the entire Gaul region, and the Frankish kingdom basically unified the territory of France. After Clovis's death in 511 AD, according to the traditional customs of the Germanic people, his kingdom was divided among his 4 sons, forming the first period of Frankish division. In 639 AD, after the death of the Frankish king Dagobert I, his son was able to inherit a unified kingdom again. However, the kings who succeeded him were all weakened by the feudal forces, and the royal power was held by the prime minister, the highest power of the kingdom. In 687 AD, the attack on Austrasia defeated Clovis II, the ruler of the entire kingdom, and became the only king in the country, paving the way for the rise of the Clovis family and the Carolingian dynasty. In 715, after the death of Charles Martel, his successor attacked the Franks. At this time, there were also power struggles in the country. Different tribes tried to overthrow his rule. The Frisons, Saxons, and Bavarians who had previously paid tribute to the dynasty took the opportunity to rebel on the northeastern border and denied the kingdom's sovereignty. In addition, the southwest was invaded by the Arab army. Faced with internal and external troubles, Charles Martel imitated the Roman legions and established a powerful infantry composed of free farmers. He defeated the separatist forces and rebellions of local nobles in various places and reunified the Frankish kingdom. Charles Martel became the actual ruler of the country. In order to enhance the military resistance, Charles Martel implemented internal reforms and implemented the system of talented doctors to consolidate and promote the feudal social system at that time. In 732 AD, Charles Martel defeated the Arabs in the Battle of Poitiers and prevented the Arabs from further expanding into Western Europe. Charles Martel was therefore regarded as the savior of the Catholic faith in the Western world. Charles Martel also became famous for a series of military exploits and was awarded the title of Martel. In 73 AD, in 762, the king of the Franks died. Charles Martel did not establish a new king. He became the sole ruler of the kingdom. In 741 AD, Charles Martel died of illness before he could usurp the throne. According to the Germanic tradition, Martel divided the empire between his 2 sons, Charles III and Carloman, before his death. But Charles III and Carloman fought over the vouchers. In the end, Charles III defeated his brother Carloman and took control of the highest power in the Frankish kingdom. Charles III was called a dwarf because of his stature and love of laughing. In 751 AD, with the support of the Pope, the king of the Merovingian dynasty, declared himself king. The Pope and the Archbishop came to Paris to crown Charles, thus establishing the Carolingian dynasty. In 754 AD, the Church declared himself king again, further confirming the legitimacy of the Carolingian dynasty. In fact, the reason why Charles III received the strong support of the Pope was the result of the two sides reaching a political consensus and exchanging interests. In order to repay the Pope, the first Pope appeared. In 756 AD, the 30 Roman popes at the request of the Pope, he led his army south twice and defeated the Lombard kingdom on the Italian peninsula. He also gave part of the peninsula, including the city of Rome, to the Pope, who was known as the Apostle of Charles. In this way, the Pope obtained a vast jurisdiction from the vicinity of Rome to Ravenna. The Papal States were thus formed. Charles actually became the founder of the Papal States. The Limit of Charles event laid the foundation for the Papal States. The Pope of Rome not only gradually became the spiritual leader of the West, but also a hereditary monarch of Italy. Both the human and divine worlds were under his jurisdiction, and he had a profound impact on the 1,000-year history of Western Europe. After Charles's death in 768 AD, the kingdom was split into two parts. In 771 AD, Charles's son Charles's younger brother died, and Charles became the sole ruler of the fallen country. After Charles came to power, he was still bound by the treaty between his father Charles and the Pope, but the Lombard enemies did not recognize this treaty. So in 774, Charles sent troops to occupy the Lombard kingdom on the Italian peninsula. After that, after years of fighting, he drove the Arabs out of the western Mediterranean for 33 miles. In 800 AD, Charles conquered the Saxons and thus controlled most of Western Europe, establishing the Charlesian Empire, which stretched from the Aglage River and Danube River in the east to the Atlantic Ocean in the west, from the Pyrenees and Italy in the south to the North Sea in the north. In addition, Charles founded monasteries, schools, and libraries, taught Latin, and ushered in the Carolingian Renaissance, which was later called the First Awakening of Europe. In 800 AD, Charles was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope for his immortal achievements, and for helping Pope Leo III to quell the rebellion of Roman nobles. He became the first Manchu leader in history to be crowned Roman Emperor by the Pope, known in history as Charlemagne. Later generations called him Charlemagne, and also called him the Governor of Europe. Charles thus reached the pinnacle of power, and the figure on the red King of Hearts on the familiar playing card is Charlemagne. In fact, Charles's coronation as Roman Emperor was also the result of an exchange of political interests between theocracy and royal power. Most of the areas conquered by Charles were originally territories of the Western Roman Empire. As the King of the Franks, Charles lacked certain control over these areas. Legitimacy. At that time, only the Roman Emperor was qualified to rule these places, but there was already a Roman Emperor in the Eastern Roman Empire at that time, and Charles's coronation would not be recognized by the Eastern Roman Empire. So Charles planned to create a new Roman Empire and crown himself as the Yellow Emperor to compete with the Eastern Roman Empire. In order to repay Charles for expanding the scope of missionary work, the Roman Church weakened and expelled the influence of the Eastern Roman Empire in Italy, so it successfully crowned Charles. After that, Charlemagne used a series of means to force the Eastern Roman Empire to compromise. Charlemagne's successful coronation realized the combination of the traditions of the ancient Roman Empire and the royal power of the Western barbarians, making the king of the Frankish kingdom a Roman emperor on an equal footing with the Eastern Roman emperor. Charlemagne could not only rule the Frankish kingdom as a king, but also lead the entire Western European Christian world as a Roman emperor. The combination of religious power and royal power became closer, but after Charlemagne's death, the empire gradually disintegrated. Charlemagne's unified Ponta Empire could only be maintained by the pawn Louis of the pious Qing until 843 AD. The three sons of Louis the Great ended the long civil war and signed the Treaty of Verdun, which divided the unified empire into three parts, namely the West Frankish Kingdom, the East Frankish Kingdom, and the Middle Frankish Kingdom. The West Frankish Kingdom evolved into the later France, the East Frankish Kingdom and Germany evolved into the later Germany, and the Middle Frankish Kingdom evolved into the later Italy. The division of the Frankish Kingdom was the result of the Franks' traditional enfeoffment of their sons, and also the result of Charlemagne's failure to fully integrate different tribes and cultures. The three modern countries of Germany, France and Italy were formed on the basis of this division of the empire. Therefore, many people regard Charles the Bold, the grandson of Charlemagne, the West Frankish king, as the first king of France. Later, in the Treaty of Prim in 855 AD, the Treaty of Mulsanne in 870 AD, and the Treaty of Ribemont in 880 AD, entire Frankish kingdom was subdivided many times. Since then, the Frankish kingdom has never been unified again. Different parts of the kingdom have developed different customs, folkways and languages and became independent countries. In the subsequent development process, only Western France continued to use the name Frank. In this struggle for power and territory, the Carolingian dynasty gradually went to the point of collapse. At the same time, the Vikings rose and grew, and constantly eroded and harassed the French territories along the Seine and Loire rivers. The Vikings were called Normans by Western Europeans at the time, which means northerners. From 885 to 886, while the West Frankish king Charles III led his army to the south, tens of thousands of Vikings sailed east along the Seine River and headed straight for Paris, attempting to capture the French capital in one fell swoop. The Battle for Paris, which lasted for nearly a year, started. In order to lift the siege of Paris, Charles III finally chose to compromise with the Vikings. Charles III was killed. The Scarf troops led by Rollo were paid 700 bang of silver as long as the Vikings withdrew. The other side was allowed to cross the Seine River and go deeper into the Duchy of Burgundy further east. Rollo also gladly accepted this condition. The siege of Paris was lifted in 911 AD. West Frankish king Charles III and the Viking leader Rollo signed the Treaty of St. Clair. The Treaty of Epte gave Rollo the Seine estuary area on the northern coast centered on King Wu as his fief. The Duchy of Normandy thus grew from Paris, and undoubtedly changed the future of the entire France. West Frankish king Charles III lost the support of the people because of his cowardly performance and was soon overthrown. Rollo and his subordinates stayed in France and were given fiefs to establish the Duchy of Normandy. In 987 AD, Louis V, king of the West Frankish kingdom, died. Carolingian dynasty played a reluctant role. With the support of the French nobles, Capetevu was crowned king. The Capetian dynasty was thus created, replacing the Carolingian dynasty that had previously ruled France. The Capetian dynasty maintained its rule in France for 341 years. Successive kings have laid the foundation for the French nation-state by expanding and consolidating the royal power. In the early years of the dynasty, France was still a feudal separatist country. The territories directly controlled by the royal family were directly between the Seine and Loire rivers. The major duchies and counties were divided like independent kingdoms. In 1066 AD, the French feudal lords headed by William the Ritual, Duke of Normandy, completed the conquest of England, and the Norman conquest. William established the Norman dynasty in England, so he was called William the Conqueror. However, William still retained the title and fiefdom of the Duke of Normandy and passed it on to the subsequent kings of England. This laid the fuse for the long-term conflict between England and France in the future. During the reign of Louis VI, the sixth king of the Capetian dynasty, he defeated the feudal lords of all sizes in the royal territories one after another, issued communal charters to cities, and granted city residents autonomy, making the rule of the Capetian dynasty more stable. In 154 AD, Henry, Count of Anjou of France, integrated the English throne and the Duke of Normandy into the throne as King Henry II of England. Henry incorporated his territories in France into the royal family of England. In addition, in 1152, Henry II married Duchess Eleanor of Aquitaine, the early Duchy of Aquitaine of King Louis VII of France. Henry added most of the territory of the Duchy of Aquitaine to the original territory. His strength had far surpassed the royal territories ruled by Louis VII of the Capetian dynasty of France. This gave way to. The first period was very dissatisfied, and these events also led to the increasing tension between Britain and France, which became the starting point of the crisis of the royal power of the Capetian dynasty of France and the beginning of the First Hundred Years' War between Britain and France. At that time, the change of dynasties between Britain and France also affected the situation in the whole of Europe. After the death of Louis VII in 180 AD, his son Philip II became the ninth king of the Capetian dynasty of France. Philip II was a powerful monarch of the Capetian dynasty of the Kingdom of France and one of the leaders of the Third Crusade in Europe. During his reign, he carried out reforms internally, cracked down on the nobles, expanded the territory externally, and resisted foreign invasions. The royal territory continued to expand, and the royal power turned from weak to strong, which made France take the most critical step towards centralization. In 1200, Philip II issued a charter recognizing the legitimacy of the Paris Teachers' Guild and specially approved the teachers and students of Paris to enjoy judicial privileges. This event was regarded by later generations as the symbol of the birth of the University of Paris. From the 13th century onwards, Paris gradually developed into the ideological and cultural center of Western Europe. Later, the establishment of the University of Paris also led to the establishment of the earliest universities in Europe, such as Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. The University of Paris, as the earliest university in the modern sense in Europe, is also known as the mother of European universities. However, in the early days of his reign, the French Anjou family, which had the title of King of England, occupied a large territory, which also hindered the unification of France. After Philip II consolidated his power, he began a long struggle with the Plantagenet dynasty of England. In 1203 AD, Philip II conquered Normandy and merged large territories such as Anjou. However, Philip II's actions undoubtedly made King John of England dissatisfied. In order to regain the lost territory, John formed an alliance with Holy Roman Emperor Alto IV and agreed to attack Philip II's France from the east and the west. In 1214 AD, King Philip II of France and the anti-French coalition broke out in the Battle of the French Empire. Philip II defeated the anti-French coalition in this battle and won a decisive victory in the war. The battle was the largest battle in Western Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire. The victory of the French army marked the replacement of Germany by France. In the following years, Philip II became the most important country on the European continent. Germany continued to weaken and split in history, while France became the #1 power in Western Europe after the 100 Years' War. In addition, this battle also enabled Philip II to retain the territories of Normandy and Anjou that he had previously seized from the Golden Snowflake family. The king's control over the European continent would be limited to a small area on the southwest coast. The territory of the French king thus expanded 3 times. The royal power increased greatly, and the prestige and power of the royal family reached unprecedented heights. During the reign of Philip II, he also actively built the city of Paris, giving the entire Paris cityscape a new look. The famous Louvre was built by him. Its main purpose was to protect the city of Paris. Thanks to Philip's efforts during his more than 240 years of reign as king, Philip II played the most critical role in the long process of France's transition from the separation of lords to the formation of a centralized nation-state. France thus avoided falling into a long-term situation of feudal separatism and endless wars like Germany. During his reign, Paris established its status as the capital of the country. From then on, he was unshakable. For these reasons, Philip II was included in the list of the top 100 influential emperors and ranked 91st. During the reign of Louis IX, the 11th king of the Capetian dynasty, he carried out judicial, monetary and military reforms internally, developed culture and art, suppressed aristocratic rebellions, strengthened and consolidated centralization, defeated rebels externally, and jointly invaded with King Henry III of England to annex all of the King of England's territories in France except Aquitaine, and began to strengthen France's power along the Mediterranean coast and North Africa, which brought the Capetian dynasty to its peak. However, Louis IX was keen on holy wars, exhausted the country's financial resources, launched 2 crusades in succession, and finally died in North Africa. Therefore, he was posthumously canonized as a saint shortly after his death. Later generations called him Saint Louis, and his reign the Golden Age of Saint Louis. Louis IX was also regarded as a model among the monarchs of medieval France, and even the whole of Europe. During his reign, Philip IV, the 13th king of the Capetian dynasty of France, continued to work hard to expand the royal territory and safeguard the interests of France. During his reign, territorial disputes broke out in Britain. In order to have enough financial resources to support the war, Felix added many new tax items and at the same time reached out to the richest groups. The Catholic Church ordered the confiscation of the property of the French Church and levied property taxes, which led to a conflict with the Pope. In order to suppress the Roman surrender, Pope Philip XL convened the first 3-level meeting in French history in 1302, which was composed of classroom nobles and civilians. After that, Philip XL relied on the support of all classes of the country to win a great victory in the struggle with the Pope. The Pope's prestige was thus lost. The era when the Roman Church was superior to secular monarchs was gone forever. This was a very important event in European history. In 1309, Philip IV sent troops to kidnap the then Pope to France and placed him under house arrest in the southern town of Avignon. The next 100 years, the position of Pope continued to be held by Guy of France. The Papal States declined from then on. This event was called the Avignon Ball. Without the constraints of the Pope, Italy began the Renaissance. The occurrence of the Avignon quest also reflected the fierce conflict between political power and religious power. The victory of Philip IV represented the expansion of the power of the French monarchy and the deepening of the monarchy. In addition, during the reign of Philip IV, Ziggy also used the Pope of Avignon to disband the Knights Templar in 312 AD and confiscated a large amount of wealth of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar, the most powerful independent religious force in France, was eliminated from then on. In addition, a series of fatal blows were also dealt to the Jews and Lombards who were engaged in moneylending and banking in France, such as requiring the payment of huge donations and loans, arresting and extorting ransoms, confiscating property and even expelling them. This series of measures not only catered to the domestic sentiment against foreign exploitation in France, but also enabled Philip IV to obtain a large amount of fiscal revenue. In 314 AD, the last year of Philip IV's reign, Philip IV convened the Estates General again and asked the meeting to approve the levy of new taxes. This established the practice of formally approving new taxes by the Estates General. However, during the reign of Philip IV, the long-term war and financial crisis also made domestic contradictions unprecedentedly sharp. In 328, with the death of Charles, the last king of the Capetian dynasty, after a series of succession disturbances, Philip VI of the Valois family succeeded to the throne and established the Valois dynasty. France thus entered the Valois dynasty, but Philip VI's succession to the throne aroused strong dissatisfaction from King Edward III of England. Edward III has always claimed that he is the only legitimate heir to the French throne. Long-standing political, economic, territorial and other contradictions between Britain and France have also made the dispute over the throne more complicated. Therefore, the dispute over the throne between Philip VI and Edward III eventually became the fuse of the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. In 337, Philip asked Edward to take back the territory of Aquitaine, but Edward flatly refused and followed at that time. Philip issued a declaration of war and led his army to attack France. The 100 Years' War between England and France began. The 100 Years' War between England and France lasted from 337 to 453. After the outbreak of the war, the French army suffered repeated setbacks and was on the verge of extinction. At that time, the Black Death also attacked Britain and France, bringing heavy disasters to the people of Europe. France's defeat also caused the burden on the people to increase. Paris Revolt and the Zachary Revolt broke out one after another. After the uprising was suppressed, the two countries signed a peace treaty in 360. France lost a large amount of territory. Because France implemented a series of reforms after 369, the French army began to turn defeat into victory on the battlefield. The British army recovered a large amount of lost territory, but soon there was an internal conflict in the construction. Some nobles colluded with Britain. Although the British army was defeated in Agincourt, the expeditionary army occupied northern France with Paris as the center. In 428, the British army besieged the city of Orleans in central France, which aroused the patriotic enthusiasm of the French people. The war evolved into a war between nations. During this period, the patriotic heroine Joan of Arc led her army to rescue Orleans and successfully repelled the British, defended the southern territory and recovered the north. After the death of many cities, the French army, under the leadership of Charles VII, the fifth king of the Valois dynasty, launched a major counterattack against the British army. Finally, in 453, it defeated the British army and won the final victory of the 100 Years' War. France recovered all the British territories in France except the port of Calais. At the end of the 15th century, the last few noble territories of Burgundy, Picardy, Brittany, Provence, Roussillon were successively incorporated into the territory of the Kingdom of France. In 1558, the French army captured Calais and England lost its last city on the European continent. The 100 Years' War ended here. France had basically completed national unification. The 100 Years' War caused great national power consumption for both Britain and France, especially the French mainland suffered serious losses, but it also caused England to lose almost all French territories. In addition, the war accelerated the rise of French national consciousness and played a great role in the formation of modern nation-states. The national unification of France also laid the foundation for the future expansion of the European continent. The end of the Hundred Years' War was also regarded by later generations as the end of the Middle Ages, one of the signs of the end of the 18th century. From the 16th century onwards, capitalist production relations in France began to sprout and develop. The opening of new routes shifted the focus of France's foreign trade from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. From the 17th century onwards, France actively expanded its colonies to North America, Central America, Africa, and India. During the Valois dynasty in the 16th century, Francis I established the French monarchy, which was fully developed and gradually became the most typical monarchy in Western Europe. During the Italian War from 1594 to 1559, France also brought the ideas of the Renaissance back to its homeland through war, giving rise to the sprouts of humanism. During the reigns of Francis I and Henry II, the French Renaissance reached its peak. The French writer Rabelais published the Pantagruel. The development of the Renaissance in France also promoted the prosperity of French culture, and had a profound impact on many aspects of French art, literature, architecture, and thought, laying the groundwork for France's ideological emancipation and Enlightenment movements. Many of the French royal collections that people see in the Louvre today are actually in the past. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was a very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was very important part of the French history. The French monarchy was very important part of the French history. The purpose of the campaign was to seize church property, which caused a profound conflict of interest with the Catholic feudal nobles in the north who had a tendency to split. As the contradictions between religions intensified, it eventually evolved into the Huguenot War in France from 1562 to 1598. The Long and Great War caused serious damage to France in the 16th century. After Henry IV established the Bourbon dynasty and ascended the throne, he promulgated the Edict of Nantes in 1598, which guaranteed religious tolerance and put an end to the Huguenot War that had plagued France for more than 30 years. The promulgation of the Edict of Nantes won France a stable political situation for nearly 100 years for the development of its economy and culture. At the same time, it was also the first example of a Christian European country implementing a policy of religious tolerance and the first edict in the world's modern history to guarantee religious tolerance. In addition, Henry XL strengthened the monarchy internally and devoted himself to rebuilding the post-war country, while avoiding involvement in large-scale wars externally, allowing France's economy to recover rapidly. In 1610, Henri IV was assassinated by a fanatical Catholic because he rebuilt Henri IV from the ruins of war. He was praised by the people as the wise King Henry and posthumously known as Henry the Great. However, Henry IV's policy of religious tolerance was terminated with his death. After Henry's death, his eldest son Louis XIII became the second king of the Bourbon dynasty of France. His mother Marie was regent in his childhood. In 1624, Cardinal Richelieu was rewarded by King Louis XIII and appointed prime minister, starting his 18-year journey as a powerful official. Later generations called him the greatest, most strategic and most ruthless quarreler in French history. During his tenure as prime minister, he played a leading role in French political decision-making. He weakened and suppressed local nobles internally, completely consolidated the French royal autocracy, and used diplomatic skills externally to maximize France's interests. In addition, Richelieu built the first ocean-going navy, the first colonial company, and the first Royal Academy. Therefore, Richelieu was hailed as the father of the French navy. From 1618 to 1648, the Bourbon dynasty and the Habsburg dynasty in Iberia and Germany had strong ties. In the war for European hegemony, France eliminated the threat of Habsburg hegemony and won the final victory of the war. France became the new European hegemon. In this 30-year-long European marriage war triggered by religious issues, France's hegemony played a very important role. It raised France's status and influence in Europe. Richelieu died in 1642 and was unable to personally witness the victory of this protracted anti-Habsburg war promoted by foreign hands. However, with the signing of the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, Richelieu's goal of making the French king glorious was finally realized. Richelieu pursued the theory of state supremacy and was considered by some scholars to be the pioneer of modern practical rationalist diplomacy. In the West, he is known as the father of modern diplomacy. In 1642, Mazarin succeeded Cardinal Hongy as prime minister. In 1643, Louis XIII died and Louis XIV ascended the throne. At the beginning of Louis XIV's accession to the throne, his mother Anne of Austria was regent. During this period, Mazarin constantly helped and expand her ruling position and basically played the role of Mazarin, who played the role of the ruler of France and Anne's ruler, effectively aligned French policy with the monarch, thus winning Anne's favor. However, when Mazarin first took office, it happened to be the decisive moment for the French army in the 30 Years' War. In order to cope with the needs of the war, Mazarin levied taxes and amassed wealth, which aroused the jealousy of the nobles and the anger of the people. During this period, the French nobles also became active again and formed the Fronde with Madame de Chevreuse, Prince of Condé, and Madame de Longueville as the core. The French royal rule was facing a grim situation. As dissatisfaction with the regency team and the monarchy took root among the people, the Fronde broke out in 1648. This armed uprising of the people of Paris lasted until 1653. King Louis X was forced to flee Paris twice. Mazarin was resigned 3 times. In 1653, the Fronde was completely over. Tired of the tyranny of the Grand Condé, the Fronde of Paris, who was fighting against the Fronde, welcomed Louis XIV and his mother back to Paris to rebuild the centralized royal government. Mazarin regained power after the death of Louis X, but this rebellion 1661 Mazarin died of illness at the age of 24. The young King Louis XIII began to rule the country himself and announced that he would no longer appoint another prime minister. Louis XIV, nicknamed the Sun King, was the King of France and King of Navarre of the Popin dynasty. He reigned for 72 years and 110 days, making him one of the longest reigning monarchs in French history. It is also the longest reigning monarch in world history and has a clear record. After the cleansing of the government, Louis XIV established an unparalleled monarchy with centralized power. He made a lot of efforts for this. Perhaps the Paris people's uprising in the early period cast a lot of shadows on Louis XIV, so Louis XIV built a huge palace and the Palace of Versailles on the outskirts of Paris. In 1982, Louis XIV moved to this palace. In addition, he concentrated the great nobles in the Palace of Versailles. The entire French bureaucracy was concentrated around him, making the nobles his equal members, removing their power as local governors, thereby weakening the power of the nobles and strengthening the French king's military, financial and institutional decision-making power. Therefore, the construction of the Palatinate was one of Louis X's strategies to concentrate political power. In order to obtain supreme power, Louis XIV overthrew the previous king Henry IV, who was ordered by the new more tolerant Lord of Nantes in 1598 to unify France's religious beliefs, that is, to prohibit religious freedom, which forced many Protestants to convert to Catholicism. At the same time, Louis XIV ruthlessly suppressed the rebellious provincial nobles, sent judicial police and financial supervisors to the provinces, reorganized the armaments, expanded the manpower, introduced new weapons and advanced technology, and controlled the dispatch of the troops in the provinces in the hands of the central government. In terms of economy, Courbet was appointed to promote mercantilism and promote the development of French capitalist industry and commerce. During the period of Louis XIV's integrity, the French autocratic monarchy entered its heyday. In addition, during the reign of Louis XIV, France launched 3 major wars. The War of the Succession between France and Spain took place between 1667 and 1668. This war ended with the victory of France. The Franco-Spanish War between 1672 and 1678 ended with the signing of the Treaty of Nieuwegein in 1678. The treaty granted France control over France and some cities in Flanders and Hainaut. France won and began to dominate Europe. The War of the Grand Alliance between 1688 and 1697 was caused by Louis XIV's desire to make large-scale expansion in Europe. Therefore, he was opposed by the alliance formed by the Netherlands, the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburg dynasty, Sweden, and other countries. Later, Britain also joined the anti-French camp. The War of the Grand Alliance tended to a stalemate after 1692, and was eventually reconciled due to war weariness on both sides. In 1697, France signed the Treaty of Ryswick with Britain, the Netherlands, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and other countries, ending the 9-year War of the Grand Alliance. Although France gained Strasbourg in this war, its hegemony in Europe was also weakened. However, France had also preserved its position as the strongest country on the European continent. Starting from 1701, the Bourbon dynasty of France and the Habsburg dynasty of Austria fought again over the Spanish throne over the issue of succession to the Spanish throne, which then triggered half of Europe to form a new Grand Alliance to fight against France. This war was called the War of the Spanish Succession. In essence, this war was a war between the Holy Roman Empire and countries and city-states such as Britain and England to prevent France from annexing Spain and once again dominating Europe. Between 1712 and 1714, the countries of the Grand Alliance signed contracts with France to withdraw from the war one after another. France eventually became the winner of the succession to the Spanish throne. Through the Treaty of Utrecht, it divided the European and American territories of the Spanish Empire and re-established the situation in Europe. However, France also paid a very high price for its position. Its military strength was severely weakened. France once lost its dominant position. Louis XIV's uncontrolled war also caused the soaring number of bandits to drag down France's economy. The national economy was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had to gradually increase the tax requirements on farmers. At the same time, the cold natural disasters during the period also caused a large number of starving people to death, causing the society to be on the verge of collapse. The great image and superb morale created by Muisha's 4 predecessors were lost in his later years. In 1715, Louis X died in Huaijiu. Although the French economy developed during the reign of Louis XV, King Louis XV failed to overcome and solve the financial chaos and general decline left by the previous king. In the later period of his reign, Louis XV's court life was decadent and the autocratic monarchy was declining. In addition, France was also involved in the War of the Austrian Succession in 1740 and the Anglo-French 7 Years' War in 1756. The 7 Years' War that broke out in 1756 was a war between the British-Prussian alliance, the French-Austrian alliance and Russia for overseas colonies and European hegemony. Its influence covered Europe, North America, Central and North Africa, the West African coast, India, and the Philippine Islands. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris signed between France, Spain and Britain, and the Treaty of Uber-Tussberg signed between Saxony, Austria and Prussia jointly marked the end of the war. The signing of the Treaty of Paris, the treaty also became one of the most humiliating events during the French monarchy. As a result, France lost a large number of colonies and overseas interests. Britain became the world's largest colonial empire. The European situation also underwent new changes. France's foreign policy failed dismally and its reputation declined significantly. France not only lost the New World, but also suffered heavy debts due to the war. Domestic conflicts further planned to lay the groundwork for the subsequent outbreak of the French Revolution. In 1774, during the reign of Louis XVI, the problems faced by French society were very severe. Many problems arose in the economy, such as a large number of workers losing their jobs, food shortages, increased living costs for the people. Feudal autocracy also constrained the development of industry. The government's financial pool was serious, the national debt was high, and social class contradictions became increasingly acute. Teachers and nobles enjoyed many privileges, while the vast majority of farmers, workers, and the bourgeoisie of the third class bore heavy taxes and feudal business. They were extremely dissatisfied with the checkpoint system, bribery, and unfair taxation system, especially opposed to the privileges of the nobles and teachers, and at the same time represented the interests of the bourgeoisie. The Enlightenment flourished in 1789. During the Enlightenment, the works of thinkers such as Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau were widely circulated. They criticized the Catholic Church and the professional monarchy, spread scientific knowledge, and advocated democracy, freedom, equality, and rationality. During this period, ideas such as natural human rights, military dominance, constitutionalism, separation of powers, and sovereignty of the people came into being. The French people began to awaken. The French feudal system faced a serious crisis. In May 1789, King Louis XVI convened the three-level conference to solve the financial crisis. However, because Louis XVI always maintained the feudal privileges of the classroom aristocracy, he formed a serious confrontation with the Third Estate. This memory eventually became the fuse of the French Revolution. In June 1789, representatives of the Third Estate announced the establishment of the National Assembly, and the king had no right to veto the resolutions of the National Assembly. In July 1789, the National Assembly announced that it would be renamed the Constituent Assembly and demanded the formulation of a constitution to limit the royal power. Louis XVI realized that this had seriously threatened his rule, so he secretly mobilized the army to attempt to dissolve the parliament. On July 14, 1789, the people of Paris revolted and occupied 80 prisons. The French Revolution officially broke out. After that, the constitutional monarchy took power and the Constituent Assembly became the highest authority in France. They abolished the serfdom system, abolished the privileges of the church and the nobility, issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man, declared the abolition of the class system, implemented equality for all, and formulated the 1791 Constitution, which stipulated that the main force of the French puppet army would rule the country first. At the same time, they demanded that King Louis XVI and his family move to Paris and restrict their movements and freedom. In August 1792, due to the escape of King Louis XVI and his attempt to restore the feudal monarchy, the people of Paris launched the Second Armed Uprising. At the same time, the French Revolution also caused unrest in neighboring countries. Prussia and Austria formed a coalition to attack France. After that, the Givet faction took power and convened the National Union elected by universal suffrage to support the French army in defeating the foreign intervention forces in the Battle of Valmy, and led the National Union to pass the resolution to establish a republic. On September 22 of the same year, the First French Republic was established. On January 21, 1793, the National Union convicted Louis XVI of treason after trial. Louis XVI was sent to after being guillotined. Louis XVI became the last king of France before the restoration of the Bourbon dynasty. He was not only the only king in French history who was executed to his heart's content, but also the second king in European history who was executed to his heart's content. In February 1793, Britain formed an anti-French coalition to intervene in France with force. Because the Girondists refused to take emergency measures to resist the anti-French coalition, nor to restrict prices and crack down on investment merchants, the people of Paris launched the Third Armed Uprising, overthrew the Girondists and established the Jacobite dictatorship. The Jacobite took measures to solve the land problem of the peasants and promulgated the first Republican Democratic Constitution of France, the 1793 Constitution, in June. In addition, a general mobilization order was issued to drive away the foreign intervention forces and suppress the domestic rebellion in Chie. In 1794, fierce internal fighting began within the Jacobite faction. The implementation of the terror policy also aroused people's opposition. In July 1794, the Gervais Party launched a coup to overthrow the rule of the Jacobite Party. After the Gervais Party came to power, on the one hand, they eliminated the Jacobite Party's terror policy and radical measures, and on the other hand, they tried their best to protect the Thermidorians, established the metropolitan government in the autumn of 1795, and the reign of terror ended. However, the political situation in France was still turbulent. From 1796 to 1797, the metropolitan government sent Napoleon to Italy, and achieved a major victory. The military power began to rise at this time. In 1799, Napoleon launched a coup d'état to seize power in France, ending the rule of the metropolitan government and establishing a provisional executive government. The French Revolution ended here. After that, Napoleon began a 15-year dictatorship. France entered the Napoleonic rule period. Overall, it lasted about 10 years. The French Revolution completely overthrew the feudal rule in France, paved the way for the development of capitalism in France, and promoted the overall progress of France's economy, politics, and society. At the same time, it also greatly improved the national consciousness of the French people, laying the foundation for France's modernization process. The ideas and concepts of the French Revolution had a profound impact on the ideological and social development of Europe and even the world, thereby promoting the assets of European countries. The class revolution and national liberation movement opened up a worldwide anti-feudal revolutionary wave. In 1804, Napoleon proclaimed himself emperor and changed the Republic into the First French Empire. During Napoleon's reign, in order to strengthen centralization, he repeatedly suppressed rebellions by reactionary forces, abolished democracy and freedom, and promulgated the Civil Code, which legally maintained and consolidated capitalist ownership and the bourgeois social and economic order, which played a positive role in the development of capitalism in France. Externally, he launched a series of wars known as the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars were the sum of all the wars that broke out between France and other countries from 1803 to 1815. These warriors can be said to be a continuation of the wars triggered by the French Revolution in 1789, and their essence was that European countries, mainly Britain and France, fought for European hegemony and control of the world's oceans. Starting in 1804, European countries led by Britain, Russia, the Austrian Empire, etc. formed anti-French alliances to fight against France. Under the leadership of Napoleon, the French army defeated the anti-French alliances many times and expanded France's influence to the entire world. In 1814, the coalition army marched into France and Paris fell. In April of the same year, France and the anti-French countries signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau. Napoleon announced his abdication and was exiled to the island of Elba. The Baptist dynasty was restored and Louis XVIII ascended the throne. After the Restoration, Louis XVIII promulgated a charter to guarantee that the economic order and bourgeois freedom rights established by the Great Revolution would not be changed. Soon thereafter, Napoleon escaped from the heavily guarded island of Elba and occupied Paris in March 1815. He ascended the throne again and established the 100 Days dynasty. The Seventh Coalition was formed again to fight against France. In June of the same year, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Waterloo and was forced to abdicate for the second time. Napoleon was banned from the Battle of St. Helena until he died on the island in 1821. After the collapse of the Napoleon Empire, the Bourbon dynasty was restored again. Louis XVIII was escorted by the Anglo-Prussian coalition forces to restore the throne. Louis XVIII tried to accept the constitutional monarchy and carry out reforms, but was opposed and blocked by the autocratic royalist party headed by his younger brother, the Count of Artois. The reforms were ineffective. In 1824, Charles X became king. Charles actually ruled France for only 6 years. French capitalism had entered the imperialist stage. Monopoly organizations developed rapidly. Financial capital was highly concentrated. France became a capital exporter second only to Britain. Its capital export mainly took the form of usury. Lenin called it usurious imperialism. In terms of foreign affairs, the main goal of France's foreign policy since the Franco-Prussian War was to prepare for revenge against Germany. In order to get rid of its isolated position, France concluded a military alliance with Russia in 1892. In 1904, France in 1914, Germany declared war on France. As a member of the Allied powers, France became the main battlefield. However, the war undoubtedly led to rapid social contradictions in France. In 1919, the Paris Peace Conference was held and the Treaty of Versailles was signed. As a victorious country, France recovered Alsace and Lorraine and seized some German colonies in World War I, but also suffered heavy losses. After the war, France suffered serious economic difficulties and political turmoil. From 1914 to 1940, the cabinet changed as many as 45 times. In the 1920s, France experienced economic crisis and political turmoil. Fascist forces took the opportunity to rise. In 1936, the French Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the Radical Socialist Party and other party groups formed the People's Front and established the People's Front government implemented a series of social reforms, and the People's Front collapsed soon after. In 1939, the Second World War broke out. France declared war but did not fight. In May 1940, the German army launched a full-scale attack on the Western Front. The French army retreated step by step. Paris fell. On June 22, France signed an armistice agreement and established the Vichy government. The Third Republic was declared over. From the collapse of the Third Republic to the establishment of the Fourth Republic, there was a battle between conquistadores and fascists and a struggle to formulate a new constitution. In June 1940, Charles de Gaulle issued the June 18 Declaration in London, calling on the French people to resist the occupation of France by Nazi Germany. This declaration marked the beginning of the Free France movement led by General Charles de Gaulle against fascist aggression and to safeguard national independence. In 1944, the Allied forces launched the Normandy landing. The resistance movement led by Charles de Gaulle, with the cooperation and support of anti-fascist forces at home and abroad, drove the German army out of France, and the Vichy government quickly collapsed. After that, Paris was recaptured and the country was liberated. The provisional government led by Charles de Gaulle took over the French regime. In June 1945, the United Nations Charter was formally signed. Since then, France's status as one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations was officially established. After the fall of France in 1945, various political forces launched a fierce struggle over the issue of the political system. At that time, the French Communist Party, the Socialist Party and the Popular Republican Party, which rose in the resistance movement, became the 3 major parties in parliament. Although Charles de Gaulle was the head of the government, he lacked sufficient parliamentary support. Most of the parties in parliament demanded the establishment of a parliament with the highest power and the establishment of a multi-party parliamentary republic. In September 1945, the French referendum abandoned the Third Republic of France. In October 1946, the Constituent Assembly passed a new constitution and declared the formal establishment of the Fourth Republic. The constitution established a 2-chamber parliamentary system and strictly restricted the power of the President of the Republic. The Fourth Republic. In the early days of the founding of the Republic, the French Communist Party and the French Socialist Party formed a coalition government. Since the establishment of the Fourth Republic of France, French politics has entered an unstable period. Because no party has an absolute majority in parliament, each party has its own opinions on the policies proposed by the government. Meetings are often paralyzed by arguments. The constant differentiation and alliance between the parties has led to frequent changes in the government cabinet. In just 12 years, France has replaced more than 20 cabinets. However, during the Fourth Republic, France adopted several recovery plans to rapidly develop the post-war economy, rapidly increase industrial production, and gradually enrich people's lives. In terms of foreign relations, France accepted the Marshall Plan. The plan played a certain role in France's economic recovery, but it also made France subject to the influence and control of the United States to a certain extent. In 1949, France became a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In 1957, according to the Treaty of Rome, France, the United States, Federal Republic of Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg established the Western European Common Market of 6 countries. The Aguilian riots in 1958 brought great challenges to France's colonial rule in Aguiliana. The government's unfavorable handling of the Aguilian issue triggered domestic political turmoil and social crisis. The French National Assembly was forced to grant General Charles de Gaulle full power and entrust him with the formulation of a new constitution. In September of the same year, a referendum passed the new constitution. In October of the same year, the Fifth Republic of France was announced. In January 1959, President Charles de Gaulle was appointed to stabilize the situation in a critical moment. The Fifth Republic of France also began. During his tenure, Charles de Gaulle carried out profound structural reforms in France. These reforms covered a wide range of areas, such as promoting agricultural reforms, establishing industrial and aerospace industries, developing scientific research, encouraging urban planning, formulating the 1966 vocational training law, etc. At the same time, he implemented an independent foreign policy. The diplomatic policy advocates relaxation and cooperation between the East and the West, and advocates trade and cultural exchanges with the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries.